In a phishing attack, you might have a victim, and the victim might be lured into going to or connecting to a fraudulent website, and maybe it's a website that's purporting to be his bank or some other institution that he regularly goes to. And he may be tricked into providing, let's say, his username and password to that site. And in particular, he might have been lured to this site because, let's say, he received an email that falsely claimed to be from that legitimate site. Like, for example, he may have received an email that purportedly came from his bank saying that he needed to log into his account and make some change. Now, many of these unsuspecting users, they enter their credentials. They might enter their username, they'll enter their password, etc. And in turn, what happens is that information will get harvested by the phisher. So let's draw the phisher here. We'll give him some horns just to show that he's a bad guy. Okay, and maybe the phisher will get the username and password, and then harvest that information, and then later try to profit off that information in some fashion. Okay. Now the interesting thing there is that really what phishers are trying to do is reuse credentials later on, and it's certainly a problem. Phishing overall, I would say, is a problem for financial institutions, and it's one that they are concerned with. And actually, I should say that it's also a problem for a lot of non-financial institutions. Anywhere where having someone's username and password, and it's usually in most cases, would be a bad thing. Certainly, in a lot of scenarios, phishing is a problem. Now, one solution that's been suggested for dealing with phishing is the use of two-factor authentication. So the idea there is, why don't we give the user a token? And the two-factor token, will have obviously this series of values displayed on it. And now what you can do is you can require that token value to be placed on the bank's website. Okay, so if the bank now requires a token value for being able to log into their site, then the phisher can no longer harvest those credentials, because ultimately, even if he is able to get the username and password, he's not going to be able to use the two-factor credential because he won't have enough time to use it, even if he got that credential from an actual user, because there's a time window. And typically, for example, these things are updated every 1 minute. So every minute, you might have a new set of a new token value, and as a result, the phisher won't be able to use this updated token value, and in turn won't be able to log in subsequently to that user's bank account if he wanted to. And so as a result, many people have claimed, and I think quite falsely so, that two-factor authentication can be used to solve the problem of phishing. Now generally speaking, like I mentioned, this claim I think is pretty much false. And while two-factor authentication tokens do provide security value, I don't think they are a panacea for phishing attacks. And I think the reason for that is that there are some more sophisticated phishers out there, phishers who can basically harvest credentials in real time. So what some of these phishers can do is literally, they can take the credentials they receive, and imagine this is your bank's, your legitimate bank, and maybe this is the bank's legitimate website. Okay, phishers can actually take the credentials immediately that they get and use them directly using automated tools with your bank. Okay. And so these automated tools can carry out these surreptitious transactions, if you will, in near real time. And this is the key word here, near real time. And the reason that matters is that now, through automated tools, they don't have to worry about that 1 minute window so much. Sometimes they can conduct the transaction inside of a few seconds. All right? And these particular attacks, they actually do have a name. They're known as man-in-the-middle attacks. Man-in-the-middle attacks. The reason for that is the phisher is basically sitting in the middle of a legitimate transaction, or not a legitimate, but a transaction between a user and a bank. Only the user doesn't really realize that the phisher is in the middle. Okay, the user might be entering his credentials into this site, thinking it's his bank's website, and the phisher in turn is using those credentials in real time on his bank's website and maybe providing back some fake information to the user. But in the meanwhile, bad transactions or fraudulent transactions are taking place underneath. All right? So having said all this, I think there are a couple of places in which two-factor tokens can mitigate the risk of phishing. So first of all, many phishers are unsophisticated. So let me put that down. So phishers, a lot of these guys are unsophisticated, okay? They don't have complicated tools for doing anything fancy. They really want to go ahead and take the data they get and use it subsequently. They don't really care about doing things in real time. All right? But of course, on the flip side, the reality is that attackers as a group, generally get more and more sophisticated over time, especially because they can leverage the work of their predecessors. And also, they can possibly leverage ready-made attack toolkits, which themselves are getting better all the time. So even though phishers right now are unsophisticated, over time they're just getting more and more sophisticated. All right. The second thing is that two-factor authentication, I think, there's one important point, which is it does change the economics of phishing. It changes the economics. All right. And if you think about it, most phishers are interested in using, or I would say most phishers maybe aren't interested in using stolen credentials themselves. Instead, what they're hoping to do is take those credentials. Maybe this phisher wants to take those credentials, and rather than using the credentials himself, maybe he's looking to sell them or resell them in some underground market or underground economy market, so underground market. All right, and as such, he may not care about the credentials on his own, and as a result, if these credentials contain a token value, a two-factor token value, then in the presence of a two-factor token value, it's hard for that phisher to resell the credentials because they're only going to be valid within a small time window. And since phishers, almost by definition, are financially motivated, anything that can hinder the profitability of their schemes does in turn decrease the magnitude of the problem. And so I think the upshot here is that while two-factor tokens do reduce the scope of the problem, and while they actually help address it for maybe some of the less sophisticated phishers out there, they do not solve that problem entirely because there are sophisticated phishers who can perform man-in-the-middle attacks.